the process to have all these data is very important. We have the Iran Human Rights and ICBM and Iran Human Rights have informators who provide all this information, sometimes risking their life, to have all this information and to try to gather all the real figures of the death penalty in Iran. And then, before letting the floor to Mahmoud, one of the main objectives also of this report is to have an international pressure. Don't forget human rights. This is our message. Don't forget the abolition of the death penalty and human rights in general when you discuss with human rights authorities. And we are here in Brussels at the beginning of the World Congress Against Death Penalty. This World Congress is supported by European institutions, including the European Commission, including the European Parliament. And our message is, do not avoid the human rights in any discussions with any Iranian's governmental representative. This is the base of any discussion. And I think that this is a role of the media as well, to always link. In the past, when we were talking about Iran, it was only about nuclear issues, only that. And now it's only about Trump and Iran and so on. We ask every time, and please, for the media, please towards the European institutions, include human rights in your discussion, include the abolition of death penalty in this discussion. Maybe now, for the figures, I think the best thing is to let the floor to Mahmoud.
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, I support anything that Rafael said, that we want human rights to be on top of the agenda between EU and Iran in any dialogue. So as Rafael mentioned, we use different sources for to make this report. Some of the sources I have written there, they're official media, websites of judiciary, so they are officially announced, but most of the executions are not officially announced. They are a secret. And we provide these numbers by information to the families, lawyers, sources within the prisons, and other human rights groups, and all officially unannounced executions have been confirmed by 2 independent sources. So you can imagine it is very difficult to confirm through 2 independent sources under those conditions. So the numbers we provide are lower than the actual number, but we believe that it's the most realistic report to be presented at this time. So if you look at the execution trends throughout the year, the yellow is the numbers that have not been announced officially. Most of the executions are not announced. And this year we had 273 executions, which we could confirm through 2 independent sources, and 66% of them were not announced officially. You probably have heard news about Mr. Zarif's resignation, Iranian foreign minister, and some people have been talking about that there are hardliners within the system, and they are, the president and foreign minister. And I can, based on our numbers, if we compare the 2 presidents, Ahmadinejad and Rouhani, Ahmadinejad's 8 years and Rouhani's 5.5 years. The number of executions are higher during the 5.5 years of Rouhani. And the number of executions, monthly average number of executions are almost twice as high, has been during President Rouhani's presidency. And neither Foreign Minister Zarif nor President Rouhani have ever protested or expressed any concern about these numbers. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. We can look at the number of compared execution numbers in the last 14 years. There is one good thing. For the first time, we can announce something positive in this report, and that is that since Iran Human Rights started preparing the report in 2008, today's numbers are the lowest. The lowest numbers in 10 years. But still, it's among the highest in the world. So Iran is still, after China, the top executioner of the world, but we see a very significant reduction, which we've welcomed. We find it, and we hope that it's the first step. And if you look at the worst years around, let's say, like in 2015, 2014, 2013, these are the years where the nuclear negotiations were going on. There were very good communication between Europe and Iran. So a good dialogue and good relations by itself doesn't lead to improvement of the human rights. Human rights must be on the agenda. In 2015, in average, 3 people were executed each day. But back to this year, 273. Why do we have such a remarkable reduction? And the answer is very clear, because it is mainly due to the reduced number of drug-related executions. Since 2016, there have been a process in the Iranian parliament. The EU has put it on top of their agenda, and there have been tremendous international pressure. And as you can see, the numbers this year are 24 in 2018, compared to 231 the year before, and so on. So it's the lowest number recorded, and that's the good thing is that it's because of enforcement of a new law. So the purpose of this law was to restrict use of the death penalty for drug-related executions, and it has managed. And I think it tells us a lot about how important international focus and pressure is, that even in a country like Iran, you can achieve important results within the human rights, but the focus must be there. We have a little concern if we look at when these 24 were executed. We see that most of these people were executed in the last 3 months of the year. So we hope that it's not a start of a new wave. So we are still optimistic, but we just noticed that in December, half of the executions for drugs last year happened in December. I will go very short through what those 273 who were executed have done. Majority of them, about 70%, they are accused of murder. And then the second group is something called Moharebe and corruption on earth. I will come back to it. But then you have drug executions and rape. So when it comes to Moharebe and corruption on earth, these are 2 terms from Sharia. Moharebe means being at war with God. And corruption on earth is legally a very vague expression. It's up to the judge to decide whether what you have done is beyond a certain extent, which makes it corruption on earth. For example, economic corruption, it doesn't become corruption on earth automatically. It's up to the judge to decide. Or many other things. For example, one of the people who were executed for corruption on earth, he was accused of being leader of a fake spiritual group. when it comes to Moharbe, we had 8 people executed charged with cooperation with ISIS, 3 executed for membership or relation with banned Kurdish groups, and 3 with banned Baluchi groups. So ethnic regions are important here. But another issue with this group is they are all tried by the revolutionary courts, and the due process, which in general is violated daily in Iran, is even worse in the revolutionary courts. I give you one example. These 2, they are cousins. Their name is Zanyar and Lokman Moradi. They were arrested more than 10 years ago for, they were charged with the membership in a Kurdish group and assassination of a son of the Friday prayer of that city. They were tortured to give confession. Iran Human Rights have talked to them and they have described the torture. They were threatened to rape and physically abused. And later they were sentenced based on these confessions to death. They were executed and buried. The family don't know where their bodies are. One of them, Lokman, who is here, he could prove that he was not even present in that city at the time of the murder of assassination of the son of Friday Prayer. And the lawyer mentioned that, but the Revolutionary Court wouldn't want to hear. Execution for economic corruption. 3 people were executed for economic corruption. This is, there haven't been so many people executed for economic corruption. Corruption is a huge issue in Iran. We look at it in the context of the protests in the beginning of the year. There were widespread protests throughout the country, mainly because of the deteriorated economic situation of Iranians and poverty, and because of the corruption within the system. In summer, Iranian leaders, they promised to upscale the fight against the corruption. And what they did was to arrest some people, sentence some of them to death, and execute them. We have said that death penalty is not the response to Iran's corruption issues. And I think most people know that, even people inside Iran, that these executions are not directed to reduce corruption, but they are directed to reduce the protests. Because death penalty is the most important instrument to spread fear in the society, and Iranian authorities know how to use it. Issue of lack of due process is also evident in other issues. This is another person who was whose execution received attention. He was a member of a Gonabadi Dervish Sufis in Iran. Maybe you have heard that there were protests among Dervish Sufis, Gonabadi Dervish in Tehran. During this protest, they arrested a person called Mohammad Salas. They accused him of driving a bus over 3 policemen. So he was sentenced to death for murder. They got the confession from him while he was injured at the hospital. And when his defense lawyer protested about a lack of due process, she was arrested too. So he was executed. I talk about the reduction in number of drug-related executions. That's unfortunately the only positive things we can say about this year's report. Iran still is the biggest executioner of juvenile offenders in the world. And I think in the last few years, Iran is the only country executing juvenile offenders. In 2018, 6 juveniles were executed, and 2 of them were child brides, young girls who were accused of, who were married at a very low age, and they were accused of murdering their husbands. I will not come into the detail, but you can read more about Mahbouba Mofidi, who actually didn't committed the murder the way she told her lawyer later. Right now, there is a juvenile at imminent danger of executions, Mohammad Kalhour. UN Special Rapporteurs, a few days ago, they published an urgent action. He's accused of murdering his teacher when he was 15. According to the state medical experts, he was not mentally fit and he had also deep depression. So they meant that he couldn't be given the responsibility. But the authorities didn't listen to it, and he can be executed any day from now. Another issue, so one of the issues that Iran Human Rights and ECPM have called on, especially on the EU, is to put the issue of juvenile offenders on top of the issue. We cannot tolerate that in 2019 countries still put death penalty on children. And Iran is the only one right now. And I think sustained pressure can give results here.